Well, we're joined now by the man who's got to make all those sums add up, the Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell. Thank you for being with us this morning. So let's start by talking about your big policy announcement today, the idea of this Robin Hood tax on financial transactions in the city. Now, I can see why you want to do this politically, punish those nasty rich bankers who caused the financial crash. But economically, it's pretty risky, isn't it, at a time when, because of Brexit, banks are threatening to move abroad to places like Paris or Frankfurt?
It's not about punishing bankers or anything like that. It's simply correcting, tackling a couple of loopholes that there is in the existing system. We've had stamp duty on shares for 300 years, and individuals trading those shares pay 0.05% of a tax on them, stamp duty on them. Hasn't applied to banks and hedge funds and others. And in addition to that, it hasn't applied to the derivatives markets in terms of basically credit and equity, and it hasn't applied to corporate bonds either. So we're tackling a loophole here. Now, the issue, I understand what you're saying about the issue of, does this mean that these transactions will move elsewhere? Well, it's interesting because, one, Europe are now developing their own financial transaction tax. But
that has been stalled.
Well,
that's
interesting.
It has stalled.
That's interesting. The story that it is stalled is 2 years old. Last October, it moved dramatically forward. 10 countries signed up, and they're expecting to introduce it this year. In addition to that, this is nothing new. This idea has been around for a long while. I've been campaigning for it for over 15 years. In fact, Hillary Clinton included it in her Democrat Party manifesto as well. All we're trying to do is correct a loophole. This isn't about punishing anyone, but it is about saying to the banks and the hedge funds that actually, where they're speculating, the most risky speculation in derivatives, we want them to make a contribution. Just a fair contribution, very small. We're saying 0.02%, not even the same level as other transactions.
Well, one person who disagrees with you on this is Labour's Mayor in London, Sadiq Khan. We'll have a look at what Sadiq Khan has previously said about this. People will just go to other parts of the world where there is no financial transaction tax. And he also described the idea as madness. And you can see why, because in the year to March 2016, the City of London contributed 11% of all tax revenue.
Yes,
that's a big gamble.
It is, but we're talking to a tiny fraction more. And when Sadiq was saying that, at that point in time, the European system had stalled. It hasn't now. It's moved on quite swiftly. So I think circumstances have changed. Now's the right time to do it. This is a small transactional tax. We're asking a small contribution from the city. Look, we bailed out the city 10 years ago when the crash came. We poured hundreds of billions of pounds into it. Since then, £100 billion has been given out in bonuses in the city. So we're asking for a small contribution to them. What to do? To fund our public services, to make sure our children are educated, to make sure we have a decent health service. It's not much to ask,
Let's talk a bit more about that leaked draft manifesto, because it did seem as if this was, a complete nightmare, a farce, really, for the Labour Party.
Well, it wasn't good to have it leaked, no.
But was it not, though? Because you've guaranteed these free headlines for days. Some of your policies are polling quite well. You must be quite pleased with whoever this mysterious genius is who leaked it.
Well, I didn't want it leaked. I said it caused a bit of panic amongst us. I had to work through the night on some of the things to make sure we were prepared for the Clause 5 meeting.
So it definitely wasn't anyone from the leadership team who
No. I know everyone thinks this is a conspiracy. No, it wasn't. I tell you, when I heard about it, what do we do now? Actually, the Clause 5 meeting the next day, we took people through the manifesto. People were very excited. Few amendments, and you'll see those in the manifesto we launch on Tuesday. But generally, the spirit was pretty good. But I don't know. I would rather we stuck to our plans rather than this sort of thing. Saves panicking anyway. Saves me sleepless nights.
Now, of course, the issue that I'm looking at here is that we've all seen the leaked manifesto, and I really am struggling to see how some of these numbers
I understand that.
So if you put to one side the 25 billion of borrowing for infrastructure spending, you're still pledging at least £60 billion a year. I mean, does that figure sound right to you? 60 billion in extra?
I don't want to disappoint you, Sophie. Look, wait until Tuesday. We're going to set out every policy, the costing of that policy, and the funding source. And you'll see, I don't think any political party has ever done this before on any scale and in this detail. And you'll see the funding sources will have been assessed, and they'll be derived from quite professional advice that we've had over the time. Just as the Robin Hood tax today, I devised that on the basis of what economists were saying. what tax collectors themselves have been saying to us and tax lawyers as well. And we're using that sort of range of expertise to get there.
So it's going to be an uphill task, though, to find all this money, because by my reckoning, you're about £35 billion short. If you're £35 billion of funding, of extra revenue that you've said through, £5 billion from the Robin Hood tax, £6 billion income tax, $20 billion from corporation tax, you're still an awful way short there. So between now and the manifesto, you're basically saying that there's going to be an extra tax or extra spending.
You'll see on Tuesday what we're saying. There'll be no black holes or anything like that. There'll be a fully costed programme. Look, compare us with the Conservatives this morning. They've just launched a housing promise, which I can't see a pound sign in the press release or the information that they provide us with. And it's one that's completely speculative based on past performance, which has been an utter failure for the last 7 years. So you'll see on Tuesday, I think, quite exciting policies, some of which, of course, have been leaked, but you'll see a costed programme as well. And that'll be worked through.
And we can hold you to this then. So if it's not costed, you'll come back here and you'll explain
bring me back and we'll go through line by line.
Okay. I might hold you to that in that case.
Yeah,
let's talk about some of the ideas. You say that you're excited about some of your manifesto commitments. But it does seem as though some of the things that have been described as kind of radical left-wing, not necessarily so. I mean, take tuition fees, for example. In many ways, that's quite a regressive policy because graduates earn around £6,000 a year more than non-graduates. So why should a plumber, for example, fund the education of someone who's middle class from a much wealthier background? I mean, that's an expensive pledge.
Because that plumber will have a son and daughter who wants to go to university, aspires to go to university and doesn't want to come out burdened by debt. And to be frank, what we want to do is build upon that aspiration.
But these people only pay it back when they can, currently, don't they? When they earn enough to be able to afford it.
What's interesting about this system's imploding. We now know that half the amount is not going to be paid back. So this system, whoever's in government in the long term, would have had to adjust and tackle this problem. The predictions are at least half the amount of money that's lent out will not be paid. Look, someone has got to correct this system, and if we can correct it in a way in which actually tuition fees are abolished, people do not get saddled with debt in that way, and at the same time it's affordable through general taxation, I think that's the way forward, rather than to burden our young people with debt and a system that's going to collapse anyway.
You see, in some ways you could say that it's a similar story with free school meals, for example, where you're talking about universal free school meals, not means testing. Again, that is an expensive giveaway for people who can already afford it.
How did we fund that? We thought it was the best way to do it was to put VAT
but I'm not
on the
talking
private
about the way it's
schools.
funding. I'm talking about the decision about where you spend the money, which is on free school meals for everyone, including the very wealthy.
My view is universal benefits are the best because everyone gets them and therefore everyone defends them. And yes, to use that phrase, we're all in it together, I think is quite helpful for society overall. But also you do have to say, well, will that be funded fairly? And we believe that all the proposals we're putting forward, costed but also fairly funded as well as properly funded.
Because I do wonder, you are giving giveaways there to people who don't necessarily need it. And education is, of course, a huge issue for lots of people, lots of inequalities in education, disadvantaged kids already a year behind their peers by the age of 5. So why is it that you're deciding to spend the money on wealthy families and actually a bit of a bung for the catering companies as well?
Let's take the example of tuition fees. On the latest statistics, the number of the percentage from children from state schools has actually gone down in percentage terms, since it went from 3,000 to 9,000. I don't want anything to be a disincentive in terms of people staying on for education, higher education in particular. And in many ways, if we abolish the tuition fees altogether, we'll enable people to go to university without that burden. We will not be dividing people up either. It will be all people wanting to have an education. Because my view is this, that education is a gift from one generation to another. It's not a commodity to be bought and sold.
Did you have a row with Angela Rayner about this?
No, I don't know where that came from. No, I don't know where that came from. We've always worked closely together on this, and she's supportive of our overall education policy. Of course she is. She's brilliant. I tell you, I think Angela Rayner, for me, I always thought she was going to be the Nye Bevan of the Jeremy Corbyn government, because Nye introduced a free national health service from cradle to grave. She's going to introduce a national education service from cradle to grave.
So you're talking about universal benefits here, and it's interesting as well on pensions, because on pensions you're effectively to the right of Theresa May by as well, by guaranteeing the triple lock to people who have already done very well.
How does that place me in?
Pensioners have done very well if you compare it to people
we've got nearly 2 million
on working age.
We've got nearly 2 million people, pensioners, in poverty at the moment. And if we don't invest and maintain the triple lock, now those young people...
Pensions have gone up more than real wages, which have stagnated over the last few years.
Look, in the 1980s, Mrs Thatcher broke the link between earnings and pensions. As a result of that, pensioners have been living in poverty, large numbers of them. I've been campaigning for 30 years for this. When the Tories introduced the triple lock, I supported them because I do not want our pensioners living in poverty. In addition to that, I do not want the young people today to have a pension in the future that puts them into poverty. This is the way of protecting it.
But that policy has worked because pensions are now better off than working age households. So again, I'm asking you, why are you choosing to spend money on people who are doing better?
Okay, let me respond. People in work at the moment, why are 2/3 of our children in poverty have someone in their household in work? Why is that? Because wages are so low. So we're tackling that by introducing a £10 minimum wage and, yes, restoring trade union rights at work so that wages can be protected. We're looking after not just pensioners, we're looking after working families as well. It isn't one or the other. Also, on this pensions issue, the young people today are the pensioners tomorrow. If we undermine the pension today, they will inherit basically poverty in their old age. That's why this is so important.
You see, you say that you've got this kind of radical left-wing vision, but it's hard not to conclude that actually you're doing exactly the same as what all politicians do at election time, which is expensive bungs for people who don't necessarily need it.
No, we're transforming society. We're making it more equal, make it radically fairer, and that's why I'm saying today, in terms of the City of London, the hedge funds and the banks, we need you to pay a bit more because we need you to invest fairly in our society so that our children can be educated. We do not have queues waiting up for operations in the way that we have at the moment, people on trolleys in corridors in hospitals. We're asking everyone just to pay their fair share.
Now, if you look at the polls, it does still seem as though the Conservatives are going to be the ones with the keys to number 10. Jeremy Corbyn, in a recent interview, said this about whether or not he would stay on as leader. I was elected, if Labour lose, I was elected leader of this party and I'll stay leader of this party. If Jeremy Corbyn, your closest ally in the politics, gets around the same vote share as Ed Miliband did last time, do you think he's got a case to stay on?
This is a daft question. You don't look, when someone's about to start a race, you don't go up to them and say, are you going to win or lose? What are you going to do to the end? We're in the middle of this race and we're fighting it hard. Yes, we've improved in the polls this week, and I think that you'll see that in the next few weeks itself. And we're in it to win. Full stop.
You see, you say that you don't ask people, but of course you ask people. David Cameron, for example, was asked whether or not he'd resign or not if he lost the referendum. It's a genuine question.
No, it's a hypothetical question. We're in it to win. We're in it to win this election. We're mobilising now. We're improving the polls. Our policies, every time we announce them, have huge, tremendous support. In this next few weeks, I think you'll see us turning this round.
You see, previously you've said it would be inevitable that he'd step down if he lost. So have you changed your view?
No, not at all. What I'm saying now is we're in a general election campaign. I think we're going to win. I think the polls are showing that because our policies are so promising. And on the basis of that, you'll see Jeremy Corbyn in number 10, full stop.
So you're agreeing with yourself before that it would be inevitable?
No, I'm not even going there. What I'm saying is we're in the middle of an election campaign. We're fighting for every vote. We know how tough it is. We know what the polls are saying. But we're turning it. We're turning that corner.
OK. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell, thank you very much for coming on the show today.